We are going to have our panel session now on trade and investment in turbulent time. And we have with us Mr. O.S. Perry, Senior Economic Advisor from UNDP. He will chair the session. Then there are four distinguished panelists, Dr. Jayati Sattar, Dr. Muhammad Abdul Razak, Dr. M. Masroor Riaz, and then I will also join the panel. So I request the participants, please, the audience, please take your seat. I think we have to start, then people will start.
Good afternoon. So we start. Thank you very much for coming to this session, which I believe is going to be a very interesting, because what we will be discussing is indeed very topical. Those of us who are following the headlines, we hear about deglobalization, economic nationalism, nearshoring. So these are kind of things that we'll be discussing in this session. I think since 2020, we have been living, these have been years of uncertainty. It started, of course, with COVID. We were not able to eliminate COVID. COVID is still among us, but we were able to control it. But there was a bit of a recovery. But then we have seen this growing sense of economic nationalism, disruptions in trade, disruptions in flow of financing. But I think even looking back, perhaps things have not been, we lost a bit of a momentum, even if you look back since after the global financial crisis. There was a spike in growth in 2011, 12, partly driven by commodities, global commodities. But since then, global growth has been relatively stagnant. Asia, of course, has been an exception. But even in Asia, growth has been the countries have not been growing at the same level as they were in the early 2000s and 1990s. And I believe you didn't come here to listen to me, so I don't think I need to introduce the subject. I have a distinguished panel of 4 experts with me. So what I will do after introducing them, I will be asking them questions. So we'll do 3 rounds. I'll be asking them 1 question in each round. And following that, I'll open up. And if you have questions, comments, please feel free to contribute to the discussion. So let me start by introducing the panelists. On my right is Dr. Jayati Sattar. I'm sure everyone knows him very well. He is chairman of PRI. And Dr. Masroor Riaz, he is chairman and CEO, Policy Exchange of Bangladesh. On my left, Dr. Razak, chairman, Research and Policy Integration for Development, or RAPID. And on the extreme left, Dr. Salim Rehan, Professor, Department of Economics, University of Dhaka. He is also the Executive Director of SANEM. So let me start with Dr. Salim Rehan. And my question to him is just to set the stage. Maybe you can tell us what's happening as far as global trade is concerned. Are we seeing reversals? I mean, we hear a lot about countries. There have been, I think, some sort of a war going on in increasing tariffs. Are we seeing those in terms of figures? And also, how is it affecting Asia? Is it something we're seeing globally? Is there a reconfiguration of trade relationships? Maybe you can give us set the stage, how things are at the global level. Over to you.
Thank you, guys. I think we are going to have in this session, I think I'm really glad to have esteemed panelists with me in this particular session. And we'll be talking about these important issues, and Wise asked me to kind of set the tone, especially with respect to the geoeconomics and geopolitics, what is really happening. I think many of us are very much aware of the emerging or the developing issues now, what is really emerging in the global geopolitics. So we need to understand that we talk probably this US-China trade war quite a lot, but there are many things which are also emerging, especially with Trump 2.0. I think when Trump 1.0 was there, probably the most prominent one was the US-China trade war. But we have to keep in mind that Biden administration did not stop that war. So it was a kind of continuation of Trump 1.0. And many of the analysis at the global level still available, because as I said, the situation is really evolving very rapidly, are still based on the analysis of Trump 1.0 or Biden policy on China. Because that shows that you have two very significant polarization in the global politics, one US-led, one another China. And also in the geoeconomics, we also saw, because of this trade war, how countries like Bangladesh and other countries, they also wanted to analyze what is the kind of gains or losses out of it. Why I'm saying that the Trump 2.0 is different? Because it is not now only China. It is about many other countries what Trump administration is talking about. And Trump's reciprocal tariff, Trump's idea of imposing various other trade restrictions, we are seeing that, we are witnessing that it's not only China, but many emerging developing countries are also being targeted, like India. And we also see the kind of things which are coming out of it. So that's what I think that it will be evolving. It will be, we need to see and we need to devise, or the countries will explore the strategies, how to, cope up with this new situation. I wrote an article a few days back that though Trump's reciprocal tariff might be targeted towards the countries which have high tariffs, and US has large trade deficit with them, but even countries like Bangladesh may not be insulated from this kind of trade policy, because Bangladesh also enjoys a significant, more than $6 billion of trade surplus with US economy, and given Bangladesh's highly protected tariff regime. So this is one thing. But on the other thing is that definitely, it's not new, but we're also seeing emergence of mega trading blocks and the polarization, as I mentioned earlier, that whether which bloc you belong to. But the China-led this bloc, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, this is one of the most prominent mega trading blocks in this region, where we saw earlier dynamics, and that's my prediction. I'll come to the prediction. The earlier dynamics where India pulled itself out from RCEP. But given the new situation now, especially US's new position, I would really like to see the very interesting changing dynamics, whether India would reconsider joining RCEP, and that will be a very different dynamics. I can tell you, because the developing countries would like to, as I said, countries like India, countries like even Mexico, they would like to have alternative strategies to counter this new situation. Very briefly, I'd like to talk about this. I think YC talked about this nearshoring, friendshoring. So that is also happening. That is there. But more importantly, as a chair, he talked about deglobalization. I think that word globalization is no longer that very popular term now, or the kind of the way we used to talk about globalization a decade back. But still, I think globalization is very much on. It's taking different shape. You can't just rule out globalization. You can't rule out the multilateralism, because though there are many attempts to undermine multilateralism, especially the WTO, we know how the deadlock is there. But still, I think around 80% of global trade through the members of WTO, they do it through MFN basis, and still its rules-based trading system is still very much important for countries like us. Also, we are witnessing some shifts in global investment pattern, especially very conventional type of FDI may not be feasible or available in the coming days or coming years, where countries like us, we need to be very, very careful. So I'll take just a minute, because I know that we'll have 2 more rounds, but I'll just add by saying that given this situation, where we are seeing a very evolving, very dynamic global geoeconomic, geopolitical change, where you can't just have this very binary position, US versus China. It's not there. No, it will no longer be there. It will be a very complicated situation. And then given some of the emergence of some of the mega trading blocks or importers regional trading blocks, I think Bangladesh, I think it's very important that we still emphasize the importance of reviving and reforming the multilateral trading system. As I said, we should not rule out, and we should also advocate for that. For Bangladesh, it's extremely important that we emphasize on trade agreement, bilateral and multilateral, especially regional trading arrangement, given the fact that the country is going to graduate out from the LDC status in less than 2 years from now. But more importantly, I'll end by saying that it will be very important that how the private sector, they adapt to the new situation. On the one hand, the government, we need to do a lot of homeworks, especially undertaking reforms in critical economic domains where Bangladesh is seriously lagging. But at the same time, I think it will be very important how the private sector, especially the dominant private sector, ready-made garments and other sectors, they also adapt to the new situation. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Salim. So I'm glad to know that the system, the multilateral trading system, is still holding good. And we hope it continues. We are seeing far too much turbulence. Maybe just somewhat related to what Dr. Salim talked about, and maybe to somewhat narrow it down, I would like to ask Dr. Zaidi to talk about trade liberalization, particularly, and you have written quite a bit about it, reforms in the import tariffs, and how can that improve the export competitiveness of a country like Bangladesh?
Sure. Thank you, Chair. Thanks to Salim for the excellent introduction. He puts the context in place. I would like to think of these evolving geo-economic developments in terms of 2 characteristics. One is, of course, the turbulence that everybody talks about. But there is transformation as well. So turbulence and transformation, I think, characterize the current evolving geopolitical and geoeconomic landscape. Within that context, globalization, of course, is under some sort of stress, I would say. And within that, your question, and this is the first segment, I guess, your question is, what is the evidence that trade liberalization particularly import tariff reforms, can improve export competitiveness. Now, the evidence is, as far as Bangladesh is concerned, we don't have to look elsewhere. The evidence is right at home. Bangladesh, after 20 years of prevarication on whether to open up or to continue on with inward-looking policies, after 20 years, Bangladesh changed course. Trade openness was embraced. Imports were liberalized. Exchange rate was made flexible. Market orientation was introduced. Deregulation of investment. All of that, the whole package was introduced. And there were deep, I would say, liberalizing reforms. And what was the result? The result in the past 20 years, 30 years, I would say, the result has been rapid growth, employment generation, poverty reduction. All the three goals that are associated with this sort of an objective for the country. Rapid growth, I don't have to tell you, every decade, growth rate was rising by, on average, 1%. 1990s, then 2000 to 2010, and 2010 to about 2019. 2020 was an exceptional year. So all of that trade liberalization really gave a boost to the Bangladesh economy. In 2010, the Wall Street Journal cried, Bangladesh, a basket case no more. And that was quite correct. As far as poverty reduction is concerned, 60% of the population was below the poverty line in 1990. In 2018, the estimate from BBS is 18.7. Let's say maybe it's another 4 or 5% more, but still there's significant poverty reduction. The question is, how does trade liberalization ensure or increase competitiveness of our exports? That, the general principle would be if you liberalize trade, there'll be more competition, so that will give you, you have to compete to stay in business, so that really fuels cost reduction and all productivity increases and so on. But in the context of Bangladesh, now when you talk of liberalizing through tariff reduction, tariff rationalization, the context in Bangladesh is very different. It's not as if we have very high tariffs and you reduce the tariffs and that liberalizes trade and then you become more competitive. The Bangladesh tariff structure is such that you've got a whole, the average tariff on output is very high. And you have got an average tariff on inputs is very low. There is a divergence which tells you that the effective rate of protection in Bangladesh continues to be high, even though there has been reduction in tariffs in the early 1990s. After 5 years, after 10 years, what we saw was the emergence of para-tariffs that helped increase the protective rate for outputs, and at the same time we found the tariffs on inputs gradually declining. So in this particular case, competitiveness by rationalizing tariffs actually comes from the fact that you need to rationalize the protection structure, not just the tariffs, because it's the protection structure that is making your exports less profitable outside the ready-made garment sector. The ready-made garment sector is on a free trade channel. It is not affected by the tariffs as such. But the non-garment exports and all the other manufacturers, this is a story about manufacturers, and the other manufacturers are all in the import substituting group, and they find the domestic market, highly protected domestic market, to be much more profitable than exporting. So exporting activity has an anti-incentive bias, and that is the problem that needs to be solved. So competitiveness issue is different in Bangladesh. It's about making exports more profitable than domestic sales, and that needs to be done through rationalizing the protection structure and the tariff protection structure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me now turn over to Dr. Razak. You have also written a lot. You have advised the government on LDC graduation. You were the lead author of the Smooth Transition Strategy. Maybe if you can quickly summarize for those of us who may not be familiar with the implications of LDC graduation, what is going to happen, and what are the implications for Bangladesh's external trade?
Thank you, Chair. Summary in 5 minutes, okay. But before I do that, let me thank Dr. Salim Rahan, not because of his excellent intervention, but because of the fact that he has so kindly extended this invitation to me, and that's why I'm here. But also, every time I come to this particular conference, and I kind of quite fascinated by the fact that the effort that is needed to organize this kind of a conference, and Salim Rahan and Sanem, they have been doing it for quite some time now. It's really, really, I would say, a great accomplishment. So thank you, Salim, for having me here. Now, with regard to LDC graduation, as you know, least developed countries, they are UN designated country groups. And by becoming one of those poorest and most vulnerable countries means, these countries, they get certain preferences, privileges from the global community. We call them international support measures. The moment a country is out of LDCs, that means those international support measures are going to be discontinued for the graduated LDCs. Now, in that way, I can think of 3 or 4 routes of the process through which the implications can arise for a country like Bangladesh. Number 1, the loss of tariff preference. I don't need to elaborate this one, everyone knows this. If the tariff preference, when it is lost, so that means new tariffs can be imposed. And that can hamper a country's trade advantage or competitive advantage, if I can put it in that way. In the case of Bangladesh, as you know, we mainly export ready-made garments. And if you look at the world tariff structure, then normally the tariffs on the garment industry at the MFN level is much higher than the general MFN tariff of the industrial countries. So that is why the tariff shocks arising from LDC graduation on garment industry is going to be much more, I would say, discernible. Now, here's the thing. If we are out of LDCs, as per the current provisions in the European Union, Bangladesh's tariffs to Europe will increase from currently 0 rate to 11.5%. In Indian market, it will rise from 0 to 20%. In the Canadian market, if you are not getting that extra privileges, then it will be from 0 to 16%. In the Japanese market, if we are unable to strike the FTA with Japan, that tariff rate rise will be from 0 to 9%. Now, as I think most of you are students of economics, and including myself and Dr. Salim Rahan, who have done a lot of simulation works, our economic models tells us that the moment the tariff shocks are to be introduced, normally that hurts a country's export performance. And that is why, as you know, Trump is threatening with all these tariffs. So implications are quite obvious. However, the problem is this. In the case of Bangladesh, it is not quite a straightforward case. And I tell you why. This is because these tariff rates will rise by different magnitudes in different markets as a pointer. So that's number 1. Number 2, maybe Bangladesh and the garment industry is a slightly different kind of an industry. In the garment industry, what we are seeing, globally speaking, the share of China is falling in the global market. So China's share was about more than 40%, and this has now come down to 25%, and eventually it will go further. As China's share is being reduced, there is going to be more room created in the global export market, right? So that is something we also need to take into consideration. The second thing is Bangladesh is one of the largest ready-made garment exporters. And normally, when a largest exporter is being imposed additional tariff, there is every possibility that in the world market, the prices of garments would go up. So that means Bangladesh can be a bit more competitive despite the fact that there is going to be this tariff pressure. This is the second thing. Third thing is, Bangladesh is considered to be the world's cheapest source of ready-made garment production and export sales. And this is not only because of the quality. In fact, the recent work that have been undertaken, including some of the quantitative exercise that I was involved in undertaking was that when you consider the quality, and we call it quality adjusted unit value prices, when you take that into consideration, even then, Bangladesh's export prices are at least 20 to 30% lower than the other suppliers. So that is why, despite the tariff hikes, we won't see the international buyers and brands, they will be leaving Bangladesh, because Bangladesh will still be a prominent source of supplies for them, along with the fact that it has been quite a credible source of supplies. So the point I'm trying to make is this: on the one hand, there are tariff implications, but on the other hand, the global market mechanism is such that China's share will fall, and Bangladesh is by far the most competitive sources of apparel export. So in a way, I think we can perhaps survive. Maybe our exports may not grow at a pace that we consider, but eventually I do not think there is going to be a total collapse of the garment industry. How much time do we have to make the next 2 points? Sorry, okay. So I'll take that advantage, and then benefit and make the 2 other quick points. The second issue is the loss of policy space. When a country is part of LDCs, its government can do certain things that other countries are unable to do. Legally, global standards don't allow them to do so. For example, subsidizing exports. And that means after LDC graduation, we won't be able to subsidize our exports, and that can also cause some loss of export competitiveness. The next issue is, think about patent protection. LDCs are not required to provide patent protection, but after LDC graduation, those issues will also come into existence. So that thing we need to be mindful of. One quick point is this: many people think that because of LDC graduation, the prospects for getting more foreign aid will be hampered. But to be honest, the literature and the studies that have been undertaken, they do not think it in that way, because ODA, the flow of ODA, depends on many different factors. And most countries that provide overseas development assistance, they do not consider LDC status as such for providing that aid. And the final thing that I would like to mention is the fact that with these 3, another important point has also been added to the possibilities, and that is these changes in the geopolitical and geoeconomic fragmentation that the global economy has seen, and Dr. Selim has pointed out. But with that, we are also seeing the new issues are coming up, and I'm going to give you some examples of the new issues. In the European Union, we are seeing CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanisms, that is in place, and Bangladesh is not in a position to deal with it. Then we have also seen the European Union Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, and again, Bangladesh is not until now ready to deal with those kind of challenges. So new issues are coming up, that's one issue. And then the problem of geopolitical fragmentation. Geopolitical fragmentation undermine the WTO-based rules, so that means trade rules can be quite unpredictable in nature. And when it becomes unpredictable, it might be difficult for us to know whether we will be able to continue to access the US market the way we're accessing it, or even in terms of negotiating other trade preferences, there can be compulsion that could be imposed by geopolitical powers not to ask for those. For example, now these days there is a discussion on whether Bangladesh should try to defer its LDC graduation timeline. Now imagine we are making an attempt, and President Trump tweets that why Bangladesh should be asking for an LDC graduation deferment. Everything collapses. That is the unpredictable world that we're talking about. Thank you so much.
So again, we see the power of Twitter. And I'll come back to you about what Bangladesh can do. And again, you provided a very good overview of both, it's not going to mean a complete collapse, but there are challenges ahead, and there are some other developments that are happening. But I'll come to you again. So far, we talked about trade quite a bit. I mean, Dr. Selim Rehan, he touched upon investment as well. But I think let's now shift to investment. And there is probably would be consensus among us that the best form of financing, if it's coming from overseas, is foreign direct investment. Of course, domestic investment plays a very critical role, but flows, money that comes into a country, the most preferred is direct investment because it stays in the country and helps to create jobs. So, Dr. Masroor Riaz, maybe you can give us a very quick overview of what's happening with global investment flows. Are we seeing any major shifts, decreases, and how is maybe Asia doing?
Thank you, Ois. Let me join Dr. Razak in congratulating Dr. Salim Rayhan and the SANEM team in persistently delivering this high-quality dialogue where they convene important stakeholders on Bangladesh and global economy. This is the 8th round, and I have had the pleasure of joining at least, I think, 3 or 4 of them, and including the 2020 where I had the honor to share the stage with Dr. Zaidi Sattar. So well done, Salim Bhai and the SANEM team. Ois, I think FDI, what's happening globally, just like trade, I think this space has been also evolving. And there is a lot of shifts in the global production system that took place and shaped since the Second World War until, let's say, the early years of this millennium. So one particular shift being observed since 2010 is a long-term stagnation in cross-border FDI. Certainly, global FDI growth is not keeping in pace with global GDP, economic outputs, and also global trade. And there is also, what also indicates a very strong and positive correlation between FDI and global trade is the trade within specific global value chains, GVCs. Not every one of the GVCs, but in many of them are also slowing down. So indicating this very strong relationship between FDI and GVC, global value chain oriented growth. A very critical lesson for Bangladesh as Bangladesh aspires to take greater advantage of global markets in the coming years. Secondly, while there is a slowdown in manufacturing FDI, very encouragingly, there is a silver lining for services. So services FDI or FDI in services sector has been on a steady but on a constant increase. This indicates that global FDI is becoming asset light because when it's service-oriented sectors, you are not looking at huge lands, manufacturing facilities, huge distribution network, or transportation system and so on. And services also require, perhaps particularly digital services, a lot less of your traditional logistics infrastructure such as ports and storage systems and so on. There is a concept called smile curve in global investment. You know, when your smile starts from the center and it spreads, right? So the smile, the center, where this is the sources of investment, usually the high-income countries, right? This smile curve is expanding fast. So that's another silver lining. But what's at the two end of the smile curve? It links to my second point. The two end of the smile curve is getting dominated by service-oriented FDI, particularly services in business, professional services, technology services, and many others, and the ICT sector itself, the digital services around and digital services centered global value chain. There is also very interesting, there is a diminishing role of FDI in the most dominant global production hub, China. So if you see the last 10 years, there is a steady decrease in multinational enterprises, M&Es, taking interest in China. However, at the same time, China has been doing exceptionally well. What it indicates is that China has developed its own strength very strongly to actually take it from where it is, which was built largely on domestic policy and global capital, to take it forward on their own strength. What is also always a very dominant strand is the fracturing around geopolitical lines. Both I think all three distinguished speakers before me mentioned about this growing geopolitical tension. Trump is just flaring up the heat, but I think this geopolitical fracture started with the US policy of unilateralism. Razak bhai, you and I discussed this at the Ministry of Commerce last week, when Paul Wolfowitz authored that doctrine, which is known as Wolfowitz Doctrine, which indicates that United States will not accept superiority or challenge by another nation, either militarily or economically, or in terms of economy. And since then, what we see Trump is doing is making things more transparent and public about it, about the intent. But this has been at play at least since early years of this millennium. Now, building on this geopolitical fracture, we are seeing lesser cross-border investment flow between countries who are geopolitically distant. And what we are also seeing, that in addition to business factors, comparative advantage factors, competitiveness issues, investors, global investors, are gradually increasing the weight of geopolitical issues in their investment location decisions. And again, Bangladesh, there is great implication for Bangladesh in that. And I'll mention one or two more, because I know time is limited. What is also a silver lining is, in addition to the services, where the FDI has been increasing a non-traditional way, is to do with sustainability, what we discuss about sustainability. Environmental technology. There is a gradual increase in FDI in environmental technology. And environmental technology FDI is, in terms of growth, just lags behind the services. So Bangladesh, which is A, climate vulnerable country, but B, in terms of, it's also in the need to enhance its competitiveness to sustain its exports. Dr. Razak just mentioned about CBM, the carbon border adjustments, the European Union Green Deal, the European Union HREDD, the Responsible Business Conduct Framework from UN and OECD. These are all demanding that exporters to Europe and other continents or other high-income countries are following suit as well, that they are demanding greater compliance with environmental, social, and governance. Governance includes human rights as well. And that's where I think there is an opportunity for Bangladesh to not only adopt those higher standards, but use them to catalyze greater investments, such as in environmental technology and so on. In terms of regions, there is also, your part of your question is what's happening to the regions, and particularly Asia. One not so happy news is that LDCs and developing countries, they are seeing a gradually decreasing share of global cross-border investments. Here, I think Bangladesh is no exception. We have seen that in the last 5 years, Bangladesh, the FDI has always been unsatisfactory in Bangladesh. But if we see last 5 years, it's on a gradual decrease. Whatever number you see that comes out through the government machinery as well as in the public space, 70% of them is reinvestment. So net new investment is very little in Bangladesh. So back to you, Ois.
Thank you very much. And I'll come back to you, what Bangladesh can do to attract more FDI. And usually, I mean, I mentioned at the beginning, we will have 3 rounds. The first round usually takes more time, but we'll try to go through the second and third round quickly. So I'm terrible at managing time. So I should be paying attention. There is a clock. Indeed, there's a clock there, so I should be paying attention. Yeah. No, I can, but I wasn't.
Farsighted.
No, I do have this bifocal, so I'm still adjusting though. It's hard for me to read sometimes. Now, back to you, Dr. Salim Rehan. You gave us a global overview of trade, and as far as I know, in our neighborhood in ASEAN, things are looking pretty good. It's a very dynamic region, and if I'm not mistaken, intra-regional trade has grown considerably. I was wondering, has that been affected, or is that going to be affected particularly with this, at least what we have seen so far, this war of words between US, China, these different blocs, and we know that, of course, many countries, ASEAN, have very close economic relationship with both United States and China. What do you foresee? What's going to happen? Do they have to take sides? Are they already seeing an impact from what's going on between the two countries?
Thank you. Very, very important question. Probably that has some implications for countries like us in South Asia. ASEAN always, I think, they kind of maintain a kind of balanced approach. You see that many of the countries in Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, they're the 10 ASEAN countries, and most of them had very good relation with the US. But they formed this Regional Comprehensive Partnership Agreement with China. So that shows that they want to actually maintain a kind of balanced approach. The advantage of ASEAN is that they have been integrated with themselves for a long period of time. Just give you one example, the interregional trade in ASEAN is around 20-25%, whereas in South Asia it's around 5%, probably in recent time it can be 5.5 to 6%. So we are far behind than ASEAN, in terms of, I would say, economic maturity in dealing with situation like this. That's why I see that, ASEAN will probably continue this balanced approach, having relation with US and also with China. And given the fact that, as I said earlier, the Trump 2.0 is not only targeting China, but also some emerging developing countries will also subject to these kind of issues. I foresee that there could be a possibility that RCEP countries, for your information, RCEP means Regional Comprehensive Partnership Agreement, 10 ASEAN countries, plus 5 countries, China, Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, and Japan. Well, India was initially there in the initial negotiation, but India pulled itself out in 2019. So what I'm saying that I foresee that probably these countries probably will come more closer together because of the new situation. And probably we may see more integration, more trade, inter-regional trade in ASEAN countries. So that is one thing. So, but looking at ASEAN and looking at their kind of balanced approach, countries in South Asia, can we learn something from them? But I think there is a serious problem. I think we are a different set of countries in South Asia, where in ASEAN you would see that most of the countries, you would see the kind of convergence among them in terms of economic policies, trade policies, FDI, human development policies. In South Asia, we don't see any kind of convergence. Countries are moving into different directions. And so that is one danger, that we don't probably, single country or individual country in South Asia may have more advantage than others, but I don't see region as a whole would really just make a significant advantage, or have the advantage of this new situation. If always you allow me, because I don't want to have this discussion monolithic, I want to add some spice into it. I just want to differ a bit with Dr. Razak and also with Dr. Masturiyas. Not differ, but just to add some issues, whether they can also address that. I fully agree with Dr. Razak about these ready-made garments, that it has the advantage, and probably the decline trend of China, Bangladesh's ready-made garments can take the advantage of it. But he also pointed out very rightly about the emerging issues, CBAM, or the due diligence in European Union, where these are probably appear as more legitimate issues compared to Trump's reciprocal tariff. Because for Trump's reciprocal tariff, for many of the developing countries may appear as injustice. But for European Union, I don't think countries like us, we can tell European Union that, look, we will not follow your due diligence or CBAM, or, so I think that will not really be the case. But more importantly, I think we forget when it comes to the ready-made garments industry in Bangladesh, there are many structural problems. And that's my question to Dr. Razak, probably if he can answer or address that. Because of we probably say that we have the advantage of cheap labor. But how long will we continue with this cheap labor? Because it's no longer the issue, because the labor unrest we see over the minimum wage, the decent job, or various other issues, working conditions, I think it's still there. So I think that will probably emerge more and more as we kind of progress and as the competition becomes more intense. So that is one thing. And with Dr. Riaz, I think FDI, you rightly pointed out, the global scenario is, or for the Asian countries, is declining. But I think not for all countries. Vietnam is very good at that, So Vietnam, they attracted last year, how much? Probably, I think 30 billion or more than that. Huge amount. And Bangladesh, probably the maximum success is 3 billion. And as he rightly said, that 70% is reinvestment. Why reinvestment? Because the foreign investors, they say that they can't really do the right kind of repatriation of their profit. That means the banking sector, the rules and regulations are so unfavorable, the repatriation is not possible, so that's why they retain their profit and they do reinvest. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sure Dr. Razak would like to respond, but maybe I'll come to that a bit later. I think Indonesia has also been quite successful in attracting FDI. I see some of the numbers are very, very impressive. But I guess Indonesia is a place where I spend a lot of my time, is my home. But it tends to attract that mostly in the commodities. And I was reading an article the other day that there is this growing sort of unrest because the country is not producing good and decent jobs. So, the impact that FDI had in the past is not seen at the moment. No doubt the country is going at over 5%, but the good jobs that we saw in the 90s and early 2000s, we're not seeing that anymore. So, Dr. Zaidi, if I ask you, how do you balance protectionism and open trade, especially now that it's some things which were politically even incorrect to discuss, like industrial policy. Everyone is talking about it in different forms. It can be made in India or America first. How do you balance that? I mean, I know there are arguments about infant industry. Can you make a case for developing countries? And can you make a case also for developed countries, particularly now that we are seeing this shift, this low carbon energy shift, renewables, that is also requires some industrial policy, an explicit industrial policy. So how do you balance it all?
Thank you. That's a very, very complex and very difficult question to answer, but I will try. But first, I will be remiss if I didn't echo the compliments and the thanks from my distinguished colleagues here to Dr. Salim Rehan for arranging such a massive program year after year. And whenever we had the opportunity, I participated very fruitfully, I think. So thank you, Salim, for inviting me once again to share my thoughts. Coming to your complex and difficult question, protectionism, I think I got to talk of two protectionism right now, because it's not just domestic that we always talked about, but we have protectionism in the air, in the global economic landscape. And we've got protectionism coming out of the country which actually gave us the idea of open trade and prosperity through trade. If anybody thinks that all these tariffs that we hear from Washington, these are just chaotic, there's no method. There is a method in this tariff that we see. There is an economic rationale, a theoretical rationale that is coming out of Washington now about why the United States should be imposing reciprocal tariffs. And that has to do with the fact that the US dollar is a reserve currency. A reserve currency has two, a large country particularly, if its currency is a reserve currency all over the world, it is perennially overvalued. And that is the problem. What it means is that currencies of all other countries trading with the United States have a relatively depreciated currency. And that gives them the advantage of competitiveness. And according to the rationale coming out of the Council of Economic Advisors, this has led to trade deficits. This has led to the hollowing out of the US manufacturing sector. So one of the objectives of these reciprocal tariffs is to bring manufacturing back to the United States. Instead of China being known as the factory of the world, they would like the United States to become the factory of the world. And of course, also there's the issue of economic security. They wouldn't like manufacturing like semiconductors and pharmaceuticals and steel in particular to go out of the United States. So they would like very much there. So these are security grounds. And of course, these tariffs are also, one of the objectives is to mobilize revenue. And also, there is this tacit objective, which to bring rival countries to their heels. That is, so these are the various goals, and the attempt to slap on reciprocal tariffs is to make sure that disadvantage, competitive disadvantage coming out of a strong US dollar, perennially strong US dollar, because of its reserve currency status, that is somewhat mollified by these tariffs. Now, here is a problem. In the case of China, in 2018 and 19, when the United States slapped a 10% tariff on 10% or 20% tariff on Chinese imports, what happened was China immediately, there is an issue of what we call currency offset. If the country against which these reciprocal tariffs are imposed, if they do a currency offset, which China exactly did, the Chinese currency depreciated by about almost as much as the tariffs imposed on China. As a result, two things didn't happen. The inflation effect that generally all economists tend to argue that these tariffs are going to increase inflation in the United States, interest rates will continue to be high, and the dollar will continue to be strong. So that didn't happen. The inflation effect was minimal. The macroeconomic consequences are also minimal. So the Trump 2.0 is now sort of encouraged to move forward with their more additional tariffs, not just on China, but on European Union and other countries, including Bangladesh. There's talk of, I noticed that they had figured out that Bangladesh tariffs were as high as 155%. I don't know where they got this, but I suppose they are talking about the high value-added commodities like automobiles. That in this evolving geo-economic order, what I notice is we have as much, there is a challenge, and there is as much opportunity for Bangladesh. So we have to, there is a balancing act over there. What I expect is America, with its reciprocal tariffs, if it ever directs against Bangladesh, is unlikely to affect low value-added exports from Bangladesh, which is the case in ready-made garments. As long as we are, exporting low value-added ready-made garments, I would think that America would look the other way. It's because they are actually focused on the high value-added manufacturing, like semiconductors and pharmaceuticals and cars. Cars, I think automobiles is the one that America is going to face. Now, to come to your question, protectionism has been in Bangladesh ad infinitum. Bangladesh, I mean, it defies logic. When you have protection imposed on biscuits, for instance, at a rate of 76%, and this has been there for all the 53 years that Bangladesh existed. Protection, unless protection is time-bound, unless it is performance-based, it simply defies logic. So you can't have protection ad infinitum and expect that you have benefits coming out of it. So how to balance under the continuing protection in Bangladesh and the protectionism that is growing in the global sphere, we have no choice but to rationalize our protective tariff structure. What is important is to leverage the world market, which is much larger than the domestic market of $450 billion. The world market is $100+ trillion. And leveraging that market gives you, even with all the fragmented globalization, with all the fragmented trade that we hear about, the global market is still, it gives you scale economies, it gives you a much larger scope. And domestically, let me tell you that currently the manufacturing sector, roughly half of the manufacturing sector has become export-oriented. And more than half of the employment in the manufacturing industry is now coming from the export-oriented sector. Export-oriented manufacturing creates far more jobs than all the 100+ industrial sectors that you will find in Bangladesh. So that is a justification. Job creation is much greater in export industries rather than domestic. And unless you rationalize the protection structure, no matter what is evolving in the global landscape, we need to access international markets through FTAs and so on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So the key is, of course, balance, smart protectionism, time-bound. Dr. Razak, you can respond, maybe briefly. We have 5 minutes. And then if you can also, you talked about, of course, the challenges. And you also mentioned that, it's not going to completely collapse. Bangladesh, after all, has this huge capability. That's not going to disappear overnight. But challenges are no doubt there. So if I ask you 3 things that Bangladesh needs to do, just 3 things, to ensure that it remains competitive and it does even more than what it's doing now. What are those 3 things? And feel free to respond to Dr. Rehan.
Thank you, Chair. I'm glad that you have confined me to 3 things only. Yeah? Otherwise, it would have taken, I think, a day at least. Now, I think Dr. Selim Rahan, he has made a very valid point. And to be honest, this is not at all contradicting my initial intervention. If you look through the documents, especially the smooth transition strategy, where all these issues have been discussed, and these are really genuine challenges, for our industries. Let me tell you very categorically, the advantage of cheap labor in Bangladesh in the garment sector, I would say much of it is already gone. And here is the arithmetic that I'm going to give you. In 2010, Bangladesh exported $10 billion worth of garments to the rest of the world. And we employed how many people? 3.5 million workers to produce $10 million worth of garments. Last year, we exported close to $45 billion worth of garments, and we employ the same 3.5 million workers. So think about this transformation. So that means the advantage of having cheap labor force is already more or less, a big part of it is gone. And I can also tell you the future of this particular industry. And to do so, let's look at the industries, the cutting edge garment sector in Vietnam and China. There, for every $1 million worth of ready-made garments exports, they employ only 48 workers. How many? 48. Currently, for every $1 million worth of garments, we are employing 89 workers. So my hunch is that, and the prediction is this, if Bangladesh is going to double its exports, suppose you are exporting $100 billion. Don't expect that employment in the industry will rise significantly. So that is why Dr. Selim is so correct. The advantage of having cheap labor is perhaps receding every day. So that's one issue. Now, and of course, the other challenges I don't need to mention regarding the compliance issues that also Dr. Masuri has pointed out. Now, responding to your question, the three things that I would like our policymakers to focus on. Number one, get a deal with the European Union. In the European Union, Bangladesh can apply for a GSP+, and if Bangladesh is going to get GSP+, then even then the garment sector will not get duty-free market access into the European Union. So under the current provisions, GSP Plus will apply to only non-garment exports. So this is one area where Bangladesh need to negotiate with the European Union. And that time is kind of, going away fast. This current GSP regime is going to last until 2027, 31st December. So Bangladesh will have to find a solution before that. So that's number one priority, because if we can secure duty-free market access even after LDC graduation, then at least the 50% of our garment market is secured. And the 10% garment market in United Kingdom, it has already given us the duty-free market access even after LDC graduation. So we'll be able to secure 60% of our garment export markets, and that's a huge plus point for Bangladesh. Second issue is, if you can do anything, try to diversify export. I mean, this point has been made for many, many years now. The main point is, many people do think that, and I'm not going to elaborate it because don't have time, but many people do think that Bangladeshi entrepreneurs and exporters, they are not responding to the policy incentives. But my point is this, actually, Bangladeshi entrepreneurs and exporters, they are responding to the policies, and those policies are kind of directing them to sell more into the domestic market, not to export. That has been the problem, and we need to correct it. And Dr. Jayadi Satra is here. I don't want to elaborate on this because he has been I think the proponent of this anti-export bias, and some of you may have understood by what I mean. The third factor, I think, is going to be extremely critical, is attracting FDI. FDI is needed, its importance, no need to be elaborated here. But thing is this, for the non-garment sector, without having FDI, it will be almost impossible to break into the world market. You look at the history of global exports, 65% of global exports is managed by the multinational corporations. Why on earth we think that we can expand exports without having FDI? We can make a pair of shoes, but in order to be able to sell that pair of shoes, you have to have a connection in the markets, like where those shoes will be sold at the global stage. For the garment, that connection has been established. For other non-garment sector, that connection has not been established yet. We need FDI for that. We also need FDI for our garment sector. Why? In the garment sector, we are only exporting now cotton-based garments. But if you look at the trends in the global economy, 70% of the global export market in garment is based on what is called man-made fiber. In the case of Bangladesh, we are exporting 70% of our all exports in the garment is cotton-based. So there is this big mismatch. And how can we deal with the problem? We need to invest hugely into our backward linkage industry. Do we have that capacity here in Bangladesh to invest that much? Unfortunately, no. So that investment will have to come from different countries. Think about getting that investment from China, from Japan. Then only we'll be able to sort of build our backward linkage capacity in the non-cotton sector. Otherwise, we won't be able to expand our exports. So those three things I wanted to highlight. Thank you.
Thank you very much for very round of applause. Very specific policy action recommendations. I would like to pick on the last action point. Why, and this is to Dr. Masur Rihar, why is Bangladesh unable to attract FDI? And you touched upon it. And frankly speaking, I mean, there is that relationship. I don't know how strong it is. You know, everyone talks about the investment climate, but it's always not very straightforward. So why Bangladesh has struggled, considering its size and opportunities?
Thank you, Ois. Yeah, so I think you framed the question in the absolute right way, that Bangladesh has not been able to crack it. FDI has been, as I mentioned, one of our weakest links in the entire economy. And going forward, as Dr. Razak mentioned, export diversification is going to be critical for both minimizing risk, de-risking, but also to maximize integration with global markets. And that, without FDI, is going to be absolutely impossible. FDI, we tend to think only in terms of capital, or the historical importance has been bringing in the capital. But I think there are two important issues, two additional important issues, which are at least as important, if not more, to capital, which is technology. New products require technology infusion, and access to markets that Dr. Razak mentioned. Without that, it is going to be difficult. And many of us tend to forget that RMG, when it took off from Bangladesh at the end of late 70s, it embarked on foreign investments from Sri Lanka as well as from Hong Kong. I'll take maybe 30 seconds to another very important point Dr. Selim Rayhan raised. And Selim bhai, you're absolutely correct. Why we are seeing a conundrum. The globally investments, FDI, cross-border investment, shrinking to LDC countries, developing countries, and concentrating more on developed countries, but also, Selim bhai, on emerging economies who have prepared well for these shifts. Because the shifts that we see, and some of the trends that I highlighted in my earlier deliberation, many of them were well anticipated. Analysts, economists, market experts, investment experts, they knew many of them are coming, and they prepared well, which Bangladesh did not. So Vietnam, it's receiving on an average, some years a lot more, some years slightly less, $18–19 billion for many years now. Whereas we are getting real flow, net new investment, perhaps less than $1 billion every year. Vietnam prepared very well. Razak bhai mentioned about urgency of Bangladesh to get into an FTA with the European Union. The Vietnam's FTA came into effect last year. So they started preparing 10 years ago. These negotiations take time. The preparations take time. We did not. So and I had the opportunity to do some work in Vietnam back in 2018, 2019. One of the biggest difference I see, Selim bhai, between Bangladesh and Vietnam is while Vietnam brings in policy reforms and adjustments right on time, Bangladesh is on an average 10 years late. And by that time, the world moves on. The bus leaves, the train leaves, right? And that's part of my response to your question as well, Ois. But there are a few other areas. I'm not going to get into investment climate issues, but let me focus on some strategic issues which cross-cuts on investment climate, trade competitiveness, and so on. Why doesn't Bangladesh get as good FDI as many other countries, or as its strength actually can bring in? First and foremost, investment FDI promotion is very non-systematic and ad hoc in Bangladesh. I don't know how many of you know, 53 years on from independence, Bangladesh still does not have an investment policy, national investment policy. It does not have an FDI or national investment strategy either. All we have related to investment is a 1980 law, FIPA, I forgot the full elaboration, Foreign Investment Protection and Promotion Act, I think, FIPA. Enacted in 1980 when Bangladesh was different. The global space was different. And as the name suggests, it was enacted mainly from a protection point of view, as Bangladesh was making a transition from economic regulations, primarily run by or dominated by state, to prudential regulation, to private sector-led economy. So the protection was much more important. But today, it is completely different. Secondly, we don't have enough competitive sectors to anchor investments. Investment, end of the day, has to come into a sector. We don't have enough competitive sectors to offer to the global investors, just like we don't have enough competitive products to send to our markets that both Dr. Raihan and Dr. Razak mentioned. So that's second. Thirdly, there has always been a mismatch between words and action. So FDI remained a rhetoric. So I cannot recall, except for maybe 2019 and 2020 or 21, when a couple of policymakers were actually on record saying Bangladesh doesn't need much FDI. In general, everybody always said FDI is great and we welcome, but follow-through actions and programs never came in. So there was a disconnect between the talk and walking the talk. So I think these are some of the strategic reasons as to why we never saw the right kind of FDI. Back to you.
Thank you very much. Round of applause. Timing, maybe prompt action. We heard that from Dr. Riaz. These are very, very important in a very increasingly competitive world. I would like to apologize because I haven't been keeping track of the time. I had mentioned that we'll have 3 rounds. Maybe let me stop here with 2 rounds so that we can take questions from the audience. And then if there is time, I have a few more questions I can ask our experts later, because this is a good opportunity for you to interact with our experts. So anyone, please raise your hand, introduce yourself, and also if you can kindly mention if you want to direct that question to any particular panelist, please mention that, or then the panelists can, they can respond. Okay, I see one hand here. Yes, please. Yeah, there's 2, 3.
Respected panelist, I have a question towards Dr. Selim Rehan, sir. Sir, in your speech, you implied the fact that globalization is still a very great concept and that is running through the world. And what you implied through that, in my assumption, is there is an attention to other countries and viewpoints to not giving any retaliatory tariffs to the countries that impose tariffs on a particular nation that exports their goods. So, sir, in my worldview, I see many countries voting for far-right leaders which impose protectionist policies. Donald Trump in America is just an instance, but in Europe, specifically Italy and Germany, is moving away from the leftist point of view. Besides Canada, Australia, and other countries not endorsing the idea of globalization as we know it. So what makes you think that now, as we see many seminars and meetings happening between world leaders, like, for example, Narendra Modi and Donald Trump sitting in for an economic discussion, and they basically had a dialogue about the economic tariff exchange. What Donald Trump implied in that discussion was that India will face retaliatory tariffs from America if they continue on the tariffs on American goods. So, sir, what do you think that America still, the Trump 2.0 concept will hold on to the point of which the world still endorses free trade and doesn't have protectionist economic policies? This was my question to Dr. Selim Rehan, sir. And now another question to Dr. Razak, sir. You have, in your speech, implied the fact that the whole game of this tariff war is actually not affecting Bangladesh in general, because Bangladesh is a small player and have nothing to lose in terms of transaction or trade imbalance. What do you think in terms of the leverage a country like US has on Bangladesh? As we have seen back in 2012 when Rana Plaza destruction happened, great restrictions and good compliance policies were imposed on Bangladesh. What do you think a country like USA would do if Bangladesh were to impose a stricter, as Bangladesh imposes tariffs on US goods? What do you think US policies might do in future, as Trump has been doing that, do you think that Bangladesh will not be the first choice for importing garments, ready-made garments, and America will go for countries that doesn't impose tariffs on US goods like Vietnam? Thank you, sir.
Okay, maybe you respond to the first question, and you also. I think it's a very difficult question. It's a balance between democracy and economic policy. So please.
Thank you. I'm really glad that you raised this question. And one philosopher said that if you can ask the question rightly, then you are very close to the answer. So I think it's great. What I said that the globalization and the term the deglobalization, I don't really buy that argument of deglobalization, because I think globalization is taking different shapes. Of course, there are challenges. You know what I also mentioned. You also elaborated, especially US's new position, growing protectionism. But look at the kind of trade is also changing its form, like the digital trade, technological innovation, and also, as I mentioned, that the countries are still trading based on the rules which have been accepted in the WTO. But still, I think despite all this, expectation, there are serious challenges, because I think nobody in this room can predict what Trump can do next day, tomorrow. So there is a huge unpredictability there. There definitely there may be some methods of his, steps, but still I think there's a huge uncertainty. We'll have to wait and see to what extent there could be repercussion, there would be response from other countries. But I think there's a huge number of countries in the world, they still believe that if the rules-based trading system is broken, then you don't really see any kind of justice, when some countries imposing tariff on you without any kind of reason or any justification, then why do you go for this, to get the justice? So I think that importance will still be there. But other than that, I agree with you, the challenges are there, but what I was saying that globalization is taking a bit different shape now, and probably we'll have to see how it evolves in the coming days. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe Dr. Selim Rehan has already, at least partly, answered to the question that was posed to me. Thing is this, the global trade is now becoming very uncertain. We are now into that territory, and WTO is being undermined. I think I am kind of, towards the end of my career. Many of you who are going to build your career, you will have to deal with this. You will see what is meant by Thucydides' trap. I don't know how many of you have heard this word. By Thucydides' trap, it means when an emerging superpower challenges the established superpower. And normally it ends with hot war, not cold war. A Harvard political scientist, he has counted that over the past 600 years, on 16 occasions, we have witnessed in the history, Thucydides' trap getting into a big tension between the two nations, emerging nation challenging the established superpower. Now we are seeing such a moment where the China has emerged not only an economic superpower, but also a strategic military superpower. In the past 200 years history, we didn't see that Russia, Soviet Union, was a challenger to the US, but it was not economically superpower. Japan was a challenger to the US hegemon. It appeared to be in the 1970s, 1980s, but it was never a military power. So this is the first time in our generations we are seeing this, and you have to live through this. So that means the global norms, the trade norms, rules, regulations will be fought out by the superpowers, you see. And especially the US hegemon, a lot of things are interlinked. If President Trump wants to impose his new tariffs, it may increase inflation within the US. Suppose the Chinese currency is now going to be appreciated by that. If that happens, then all of a sudden you will see that China becomes world's largest economy in US dollar terms. Will that be palatable to the US policymakers? Probably not. They will try to buy time. What we are seeing is a messy process. Thereby, US policymakers are also trying to learn how to deal with this. So this process is going to be chaotic. And I hope after every stormy weather, we're able to see bright sun, at least for some time. That is also going to happen. But we need to learn. We don't have any specific answers at this stage, but we need to learn and see how things evolve and settle down at the end of the day. Thank you.
So let's take two more questions. There were hands at the back. But if you can be specific, just one question.
Yeah, sure.
Limit yourself to one question, and then another gentleman in the back, and then one in the front. Let's take three.
Hi, I'm K.M. Arshad. I'm a student of the Department of Economics, University of Dhaka. So my question was to the panelists that you guys have talked about the fiscal policy side or the governance side. For instance, focusing on stability, proper research, and steps. But what sort of initiative should we take in terms of the monetary sides? If you guys could discuss it.
Monetary policy, right? Okay, probably. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Shafkat Shafiq, currently studying in the Institute of Health Economics at Dhaka University. So my question is, firstly, it has been wonderful discussions about FDI focusing on the export business and its challenges. So my specific question is, at these new dynamics of the world, as well as in Bangladesh, how can we increase the FDIs for the service sector of the country? Because there's already a demand. For example, like healthcare sector, because there's already a demand for the healthcare for which people are going abroad to take. So how can we increase the FDI in these service sectors like healthcare?
Good question.
Hello, thank you everyone. So my question is to Dr. Zaidi Sattar. So you said that the USA protectionism, like the, what's it called though? Okay, so the reciprocal tariff. So it's, one of the objectives is to move the manufacturing industry back into the USA. Like it's already in China, so they want to bring it back to USA. So does USA really have any comparative advantage there, or is it just an eyewash of the Trump administration? That's the question.
One final question, and then we'll get the response.
Thank you for the opportunity. I'm Mohammad Asim Hossain from the Department of Economics, University of Dhaka. My question is a deviation from the trade discussions. I would like to ask, the panelists have talked about the development of the RMG sector, the RMG industry in Bangladesh. One key factor in its development is the availability of large number of human working age population. So as the advantage is slowly deteriorating, my question to the panelists is that what are the alternative industries that we could venture in that would give us the population advantage? Some examples could be heavy industries or heavy industries such as automobiles or shipbreaking, or even high technology industries such as pharmaceuticals. So I would like an assessment from you on what alternative paths should we take for the near future. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much. We'll have. Okay, one more. Yeah, last one.
Hello, this is Soad Arafat Jubai, a student of Shahjalal University of Science and Technology, Sylhet. So my question is, you guys have discussed about how over the years new FDI has declined in Bangladesh, and we know there has been talkings of Bangladesh joining in the RCEP member countries, and we know there are some countries in the RCEP which are specialized in energy, green transition or energy involvement. So how Bangladesh joining in RCEP can facilitate Bangladesh transition to green energy or these kind of stuffs? So yeah.
Okay, one more here.
Good evening. My question is to Masruria sir. It's about you talked about the environmental technology. So I want to know about trade and investments that is done in Bangladesh in this field, in environmental technology, and what are the future possibilities we have regarding this field? What are the businesses and growth sectors we can grow here about this particular thing? And can growing trade and investment in this field reduce the environmental turbulence we face at Bangladesh, like air problems like flood and other diseases, heart diseases and other kind of diseases? Can trade and investment in environmental technology reduce these kind of problems? Thank you. My name is Kausar Islam, and I am also studying studying economics at DU.
Thank you very much. So maybe we start from right. There were two questions related to investment, if I'm not mistaken. So feel free, if you want to comment on other things as well, feel free, but we don't have a lot of time.
Yeah, I think there are three questions, if I recall correctly. So I'll be very quick. I think we have maybe 2 minutes, right? Let me start with the very last one that came. Example of green technology, right? Solar panel manufacturing, for example. You know, the electric vehicle, or perhaps if hydrogen comes and replaces electricity, vehicles run by hydrogen, but that's still a far-fetched part. But the electric vehicle system, EV system, has a full ecosystem. EV batteries, EV charging station, components. Bangladesh is not a great country to manufacture cars because the market is very small. For automobile industry manufacturing, in order for that to be feasible, you need minimum 130 to 140,000 units production every year. Bangladesh's total demand is 25,000. And you know, we are a small and land-constrained country, right? But what we can do is what Thailand has done. They have emerged as a great global value chain participant for automobile industry, and we can do it for the electric vehicles, for example, right? Secondly, solar panel, as I mentioned, you know about the China plus one or China plus two strategy of many industrial nations who have heavy investments in China. Japan is one of them. And Japan is now trying to move very concrete partnerships with Bangladesh in terms of what they can do in terms of economic partnership, including FDI. And part of that is also targeted towards relocating low value or mid value, low tech industry from China to Bangladesh. And one of the three sectors they have identified as potential is renewable equipment manufacturing. It doesn't have to be only solar, it could be other renewable as well, right? But not the high-tech ones. Why? Unfortunately, we're not ready. Services, how do we increase? This is a complete reorientation, because Bangladesh, since its export beginning days, has been always focusing on merchandise export. And it succeeded. We got to the second largest RMG sector in the world. But services is a whole different ball game, right? Starting from our strategy. So if you look at our, I think the last export policy has taken into consideration the export service potential and has more light than before. But still, we don't have our policies geared towards service export. Second, we haven't identified enough services sectors yet where we can actually have a good export potential. Take ICT. We, you know, for at least 1.5 decades, we have been hearing about the term called digital Bangladesh, right? Still, our export is hovering around $1 billion. And in the meantime, in this period, many countries have gone to multiple double-digit billion dollars of export. So, and third, I think skills. When you move to services, skills need to be of different order than large volume manufacturing. Thank you.
Dr. Zaid.
Hi, thank you. I think the question was, how is the United States trying to use tariffs in order to bring manufacturing back to the country? Tariffs are a very lethal trade weapon. So you can see, if the US government has finally, after so many years of trade openness, felt that tariffs are going to be really worthwhile to bring manufacturing home, tariffs must be a very lethal weapon. Now, what is happening is, or what has happened is that actually the US, domestic centers, they had hollowed out the manufacturing employment. Manufacturing as a share of GDP has gone down to something like 10–15% of GDP. 80% is services. Likewise, manufacturing employment is also down to something like 10% of the share of employment. So the US government now feels that other countries have taken advantage of the fact that the US provided the largest single country market to the world, and other countries have used the fact that the US is a reserve currency and perennially overvalued, and so the other currencies were depreciated relative to the US dollar, and therefore they had the competitive advantage just because of the US dollar being a reserve currency. But US dollar being reserve currency and US being a large country also gives it financial clout to impose sanctions, to impose these reciprocal tariffs, etc. And they are doing exactly that by telling countries, no longer, you have such high tariffs, we'll give you reciprocal tariffs. In the case of Bangladesh, as I said, there are opportunities in this evolving geo-economic landscape. The good news is that, if I have read them correctly, US government is not that interested in using reciprocal tariffs to stop import of low-value, let's say, garments. So in the case of ready-made garments, as long as Bangladesh continues to have very high competitive advantage in producing low-value-added garments, we might not face the kind of reciprocal tariffs for those in the coming future. But of course, there's a lot of uncertainty as to how this is going to work out, because one of the factors that complicates the situation is the response of other countries. Are they going to go tit-for-tat tariffs? Are they going to do what we call currency offsets? Either way, the goal, the intended objective of these US tariffs might not be, or at least maybe just resolved through the currency offsets or reciprocal tit-for-tat tariffs. So we have to watch and see. The United States is not just imposing tariffs right away. They are doing gradual. What we find is they're giving warnings to, let's say, China, that we'll be doing this if you don't do this. To Canada and Mexico, they've done the same. They've announced those tariffs, but they actually didn't go through with it. It was, there were other things that they wanted from them. So in the case of manufacturing, the United States does want to bring manufacturing. At least steel must be in as an economic security sector. Steel and these the chip industry, for instance, is a very strategic industry. So economic security is now taking predominance over, trade openness or other things. So these non-economic factors are also playing its role in whatever is happening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Razak, there were questions about diversification, domestic capability, and many others. Please.
No, thank you. I think in the interest of time, I'm not going to take all the questions. I think one question Dr. Jayadi Sattar has already responded to regarding tariff and the US trade policy. I would like to deal with what I think one of the greatest questions in my view that I've heard today in this session is that one, the technological progress, employment, and what are the new sectors where the jobs will be created. Extremely timely question. And to be honest, if we have to get the answer to this particular question, and if our policymakers are listening, then Bangladesh needs to get into a transformative regime change. Otherwise, we won't be able to address this question. But here's the thing. Think about this way. We are seeing the rise of artificial intelligence, right? Initially, it was thought that the pressure on the labor market will arise only through the pressure on the blue workers. It's the blue-collar workers, right? But these days, people are saying, no. With the rise of artificial intelligence, many of the white-collar laborers' work will also be affected. And many of you, like, in your place, when I was finishing my master's degree from Dhaka University, I realized that there is a great demand for research assistant jobs. But if you're asking me now, being an employer, I think that I'm not looking for only the best, because the rest work can be delegated to the AI. Believe me, the productivity has been gained so much that even sometimes we are questioning the quality of the graduates are being produced. That is the challenge that we are facing now. So we need to be thinking about. But at the same time, there are areas where opportunities are coming out, and I'm going to specify 3. Apart from the fact that if you are not making TikTok videos, you better do. Why? Why? Because they are saying that it's the leisure economy that has seen the fastest growth amongst all the sector. What is leisure economy? Obviously, Shomai, TikTok dekhi, YouTube dekhi, okay. That is the area where you can use technology. You can be at the forefront of the technological development. And if you're really a talent, the whole world is going to recognize you. But that's a really, really challenging area. So apart from that, what are the other sectors where I see there is the potential? Number 1, health. In Bangladesh, our health, we have invested too little, you see. And if we have to improve the overall health service in the country, millions of jobs can be generated from this sector alone. Education is another sector. Think about quality of education. We can bring down the classroom sizes if you can produce good quality teachers. So that is one area. Third area is care economy, like how to take care of children, the infants, so that people they can go to work. Think about the elderly people's services. That is another area where we can create millions of jobs. Not only in Bangladesh, the whole world market is also trying to get those kind of workers. You see, so that is another area. So, what are the policy implications of this? Our policymakers need to think about what sectors they want to provide support. Right? Here's the thing. Suppose they are supporting the manufacturing, and for certain, the manufacturing won't be able to generate enough employment. But you are giving them tax-free allowances, you are giving them all the duty-free and other incentives. They are not able to generate resources. So your growth centers has become such a sector from where we're also unable to generate enough tax revenue. You see, that is the dilemma that we're having. The sectors that is getting all kind of incentives, they are unable to generate employment, they are unable to provide enough to the exchequer. So that is why the whole investment mechanism is kind of, slowing down, and we need to find way of, coming out of this clearly, all right? Just to make the point finally clear is that manufacturing, the way we're saying this, won't be able to generate us enough employment. And especially, I would also like to mention that white-collar jobs, that is also coming under increasingly pressure from the new technology that we are seeing. All right, I may not be able to kind of respond to your question clearly enough, but what I think is that this is one area where we need to think really hard, identify the sectors, and do a bit of policy work. Thank you.
So I have to take my 11-year-old daughter more seriously. She wants to be a TikToker and a YouTuber.
She should go for that.
Okay, good. I don't know how my wife will take that, but I'll use you as to back my argument. So over to you, Dr.
No, very quickly. We can have a round of survey next year when we have the 9th SANEM conference, with the number of TikTokers among the economics graduates have increased after the advice from Dr. Razak. And also, we will also listen from you about your daughter. Okay, on more of a serious note, I think Dr. Razak made a very important point that it's not only the blue-collar job which is being affected, but the white-collar job too. And that is actually happening in the ready-made garments industry now. In the last 10 years, the introduction of the automation replaced many white-collar jobs in the ready-made garments industry, especially the low-skilled women labor. And that's why the composition of, the gender composition of labor in the ready-made garments, we see the change, a very massive change, from 80% to now 60% of women's share in the employment. So that's one thing. But I thought that, because I think one fundamental question here came, and especially when it comes to FDI, and also, I think the reform, I think, okay, the bottom line is that we need to undertake reform. There is no option, there is no alternative to that. But consider FDI, and Dr. Riaz made a very important point that probably FDI should come to the most vibrant sector. But Bangladesh's most vibrant sector actually restricted FDI, the ready-made garments industry. Decades after decades, they did not like FDI, and they, in fact, made all kinds of attempts to discourage FDI in the ready-made garments industry outside of the economic zone. So that is one thing where we seriously lagged. And then if we could actually see FDI coming to the ready-made garments industry, then we could see spillover effects in other sectors too. In many Southeast Asian countries, including Vietnam, Thailand, and many other countries, export diversification was very strongly correlated with FDI coming into those sectors. So that is one thing. But my final point is that which should be the age for someone to graduate the school secondary? 16? Around? Roughly 16? So now think of a case that someone fails to actually graduate or do this school secondary certificate, have this in 16 years of age. He or she does it at 30th years of age. So Bangladesh is actually in that stage. We missed the train. We should have done this school secondary final when we were 16, but we are now 30 or 35. But by that time, many countries, they have done their undergrad, masters, and some are actually doing their PhDs. So I think that's a serious problem that what Dr. Riaz said, that we missed the train, but we are not still very sure whether there is another train coming. But we need to be, one thing we have to make sure that we have to go to the station to catch the train. I think we are very far behind the station. So unless we do these reforms, which are very much well discussed, but the major challenge is we never take them seriously, especially the policymakers. So I think if we don't act now, I think in 5 years from now, probably we'll still be talking the same issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Round of applause, please. One of the challenges whenever I'm asked to moderate or chair these sessions, I'm terrible at summarizing things. And this was such a rich discussion, really hard. And as Dr. Razak has already said, in fact, AI probably would be able to do a better job than me in summarizing this discussion. I'm sure we have a recording of this and we can feed it to the... It's already been summarized, so I'm no match for an AI. But lots of interesting discussion, and I think we covered a huge area, trade and investment, and these are two very critical areas, and there is, again, consensus among economists. These are critical for growth, long-term growth. Now, how that happens, of course, there are disagreements. We talked about protectionism, we talked about tariffs, we talked about investments, cross-border investment, so forth, and also the turbulence that we are seeing. I felt quite somewhat optimistic that even among all these changes, turbulence, disruption that we are seeing, things might eventually be okay. But then Dr. Razak, again, he gave this example of this trap. I hope we don't fall into this trap, because that's the worst possible thing that can happen. As you know,
already in the trap.
We are in the trap.
Only expect that it is not end in hot water.
In hot water. Yeah, let's hope. Inshallah. Yeah. Yes. We're getting close. But let's hope world leaders, they can, they have the wisdom, and the public, is very important. They put the right kind of pressure, so they make the right kind of decisions. And we can see, and we have done quite well. I think if we look back historically, we have done quite well, where we were 50 years ago, where we are right now. But of course, we are going through this transition in every area. And then there's the climate change threat. We could use our energies, collective energies, to combat the threat of climate change. And there are still many, many millions and billions of people who are living in abject poverty. And that's unacceptable. So with those words, I would like to thank all of you. Once again, my apologies that we had to go over time. But before going, I would like to thank our panelists for providing and sharing your insights. I'm sorry I couldn't go to round 3. We just, again, I couldn't manage the time very well, but I think we probably all agree that we had a very rich discussion, and it's all been recorded, analyzed, summarized, so we'll get the proceedings from this meeting. And what I also liked about the session was that we had some very concrete proposals. what can be done. And that's something I said at the beginning, at the opening, that this kind of conference provides that interface. So we can take up those recommendations, share it with the policymakers, and hopefully there is action. Because as far as Bangladesh is concerned, we have almost missed the train, but we need to go back to the station. Maybe there are other trains. We can jump on those. With that, thank you very much, and have a nice evening.
We'll have 5 minutes break. There is no tea break anywhere.